Action.
Hello, Kent, and really glad to have you here today and grateful that you give us some time of your busy schedule to join us today. Can you please let us know more about yourself and more about what is the principal product manager in Microsoft do?
Sure. Yeah, and thanks for having me. It's great to catch up with you guys again. So my name's Kent Weare. I'm a principal PM manager on the Azure Logic Apps team, and I guess a little bit about myself. So I've been in integration most of my career. I started as a .NET developer, ASP.NET, some web applications, and then I was working for the federal government of Canada in Gatineau, Quebec, and there was this opportunity to do some biz talk, and it was a project. It was called Medical Certificates Online. This is kind of like the mid 2000s, so a long time ago. But it was one of those things where it's like, hey, we're gonna. I was working for the federal government, and they were providing like social. It was a social program where it was called compassionate care, where if one of your loved ones was at significant risk of dying, you could actually go on like a kind of like a medical leave or a compassionate leave, and basically get like your employment insurance benefits while you were taking care of your loved one. And that was a situation where it required like a doctor to be able to go ahead and sort of assert that this person did need some care. And so that was this opportunity to get into biz talk. And at the time I didn't know what biz talk was, but I thought the use case was kind of cool. I thought it was one of those things where it's like, hey, this is actually like very impactful. This could really help people during sort of challenging times. And that's what kind of drew me. And I was totally open to learning some new technology. And so there was like these enterprise architects that said, hey, maybe we should use biz talk. And so that got me started on down that path. And from there, kind of just my the opportunities really started to come. Just being involved in integration. I then moved west out to Calgary, Canada, and then had the opportunity to start working in some healthcare projects in BC, in British Columbia. And then from there, I live in Calgary. Energy is kind of a big industry here, and I started to get more and more involved in energy and basically building integrations, predominantly using BizTalk, and then sort of later on Logic Apps. And basically, a lot of the use cases I talk about are energy related, just because it's something I can pull from the past. And I've always just been really interested in integration in the sense that you're able to create something out of something that was probably never envisioned, or maybe not to the same extent, right? Like you have system A that was built, it might expose some certain interfaces, web services, file formats, etc. You have system B built by a different vendor. They did not work together in order to like make these things fit, and then using middleware, you can go ahead and make a solution out of it, drive some value. And I've been really fortunate to work with a lot of companies that have valued integration and saw value in it, and as a result, it's created a lot of opportunities. So I've kind of gone from developer to sort of a tech lead to a manager to architecture, and yeah, I just spent most of my career. And then I'd say probably 5, 6 years ago, I had the opportunity to join Microsoft. It was I did join what was called the Microsoft Flow team at the time. It's now Power Automate, and I sort of started to get involved in product management and sort of learning the ropes from that perspective. I also spent a couple years working on the CAT team, the customer advisory team for the Power Platform, and I was really focused on RPA. Microsoft, we had just introduced RPA inside of Power Automate, Power Automate Desktop. I was also really involved in the conversational AI with Power Virtual Agents. And then I'd say for the last 2.5 years, I was able to join the Logic Apps team. There was an opening that sort of emerged, and I joined the team about 2.5 years ago. And then probably about, I guess, 9 months ago or so, then I took on a leadership role in the Logic Apps team. So I oversee a lot of the product management investments, work with the other PMs on the team in terms of strategy and delivery, and just sort of really focus on how we can help customers solve their integration needs.
So out of your time, how much have changed since you went to a manager role? I mean, how much of your time is management and how much time is technical?
Uh, The Yeah, I'd say that's the one thing I like about working at tech companies.
Yeah.
I think because we could spend a whole hour on this question here, but like I think historically when I was working at some of these energy companies, there was like this line, and I've always enjoyed the technical stuff,
Yeah.
and for some reason I kept getting pulled into these management roles, and it was one of those things where I do sort of enjoy coaching and helping people get more out of their careers. I think that's super important. I do enjoy that, but I still at the end of the day joined this industry because I was curious about the technology, like to touch it, like to understand it, and I feel the best way to understand it is to actually use it.
Mm.
So that's one thing I do like about Microsoft is it's one of those things where no one will ever tell you don't touch the technology, focus on something else. Obviously you have to focus on the people side first and prioritize that. But the ability to go grab the latest build of whatever component
Mm.
is sort of something that keeps me sharp. I do feel that in order for someone to be relevant, you have to be hands on to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And I think the challenge is always
Yeah.
how do you balance sort of your sort of core responsibilities with the things that you like, and certainly finding time to do that. And I would say I have a YouTube channel. I try to post quite frequently, and I think that's also an outlet
Mm.
for me to go ahead and try these things. So, when I'm involved in specific features, naturally I'll post them on YouTube. But even other features where I just want to be able to, experience them, I'll go do that. So, recently I put out a video about templates. I wasn't involved in the templates initiative. Divya was on leading that, and so it was an opportunity for me to explore it because I do talk to customers a lot. I do present a lot, so it is important that I can actually talk intelligently about these
Yeah,
things. And
obviously you talk also to a lot of technical
Yeah.
people, and yes, you need to keep up the conversation at some points, I think.
But
So
but
yeah,
I'm but I'm also glad to hear that it's a global
yeah,
conversation and a global question of what happens to my techie side when I go to management.
yes, and talk about
yeah,
the journey you had there. It's amazing. You have done everything I would like to do, but also you had a lot of other things that you were doing while not pursuing your technical career, like your free time activities.
So free time. So I am married. I do have two daughters. They're now teenagers. So that's always interesting, but they're good. So so far so good for that perspective. I try to get outside a lot. I really do. I do run. I completed the Tokyo Marathon in, I guess that was March. Yesterday there was a 10K race here in Calgary. So my oldest daughter, she did it. My wife walked. My brother, he lives fairly nearby. He came down, and then we ran the 10K. So tried to do that. The last few years have been more and more involved in golf. So it's one of those things where it's a challenging game. It's great once again to be outside. Living in Canada, our summers are short, so you kind of take advantage of it while you can.
Mhm.
And I also do enjoy skiing as well. So being in Calgary, we've got some amazing ski hills not too far away. Banff, Sunshine Village, Lake Louise
Hmm.
are all pretty close. And then you cross the border into BC, and you've got Fernie and Kimberley and Kicking Horse, and it's a great place to live. We're kind of in the mountains, so not the best for like summer weather, but great if you like outdoor sports.
But I mean, we talked to Wagner earlier, and we
Yes,
asked him actually to pass a question to you. And I
Okay.
mean, he mentioned balance, and you mentioned balance,
mm,
and he mentioned really what you said now. I mean, how do you find time to do all the things you do in your career, but also running and playing golf
and
and
the family and everything
yeah,
together. So that question passed from
that's
uh,
that's like from Wagner actually. So it's very interesting
Uh,
that you mentioned it.
the and I'd say I haven't always been the best at this, for sure. I'd say 7 years ago, 10 years ago, I think answer might have been a little bit different. But I do feel like yeah, I don't know. I think it's important to have that balance. I think I try to be very, I guess, protective of my time. I try to be very efficient with my time. I'd say about 10 years ago, I went and did my master's degree. And I think that forced me to really like be productive with my time, be very focused with my time. get in, get out, like put in the work. I do believe in, perfection is the enemy of progress.
Mm.
And I know sometimes people can use that as an excuse, but I do believe it. Like, I'm definitely one of those like quick start kind of purple people. Like, let's get in, let's get it started, let's get it done. And then, it's one of those things where then things might shift. You might have to then adjust on the fly. But I just be very protective with my time. Ever since having kids, I do get up earlier in the morning. I do find that, like, getting some of that sort of quiet time,
Mm.
focus time, if you will, is super important.
Mm.
Getting things out of the way. And, I think health is just something that you just got to prioritize,
Yeah.
especially as you get older. Like, you got to make time for exercise. You have to sleep. I think I always prioritize sleep. I always give myself a window to get good sleep. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't, but I think you have to, like, give yourself a window to make that happen. And I think that sort of hero mentality of like, oh, I don't sleep, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Like, I don't subscribe to that. I do think that you need to be at your best mentally.
Mm.
You do need to focus on sleep. So I don't know. I try to balance. It's one of those things where, I've got a very strong support network with my wife and family. So she's super supportive of a lot of the things that I do here. But yeah, it's yeah, I kind of
Yeah,
do
family
what I can.
is a big support to that. So you need to have a really strong support to actually be able to do to go through this.
Yeah.
Um, and like if I would like to take us back to London now in June and like talk about something that I'm actually trying to figure out now. I know that it's maybe coming soon.
Mm.
Maybe you can give us more information about that if possible. It's how to have an hybrid solution logic apps Azure Arc.
Yeah, no, happy to. So in at London, we did announce
Mm.
the what we call the early access preview. You could kind of think of it like a private preview
Mm.
of our hybrid offering, and we're calling it the hybrid deployment model,
Mm.
Logic App's hybrid deployment model. And the reason for that name is that it is Logic App standard,
Mm.
and our goal is really to have parity. And it becomes more of a just, hey, where do you want to deploy this? Where do you want to host it? And
Mm.
at the end of the day, it becomes this conversation of like customer managed infrastructure, which would be this hybrid, or Microsoft managed infrastructure, and that would be our existing offerings like the workflow service plans or the ACE v3 offering itself. And so the customer managed option is like a good option for customers that have specific needs around where they host their workloads. Like, maybe that is on premises, which, for BizTalk customers, that might be important for them.
Mm.
We do run in from time to time customers that are multi-cloud, especially some of these like larger multinational global customers. They do have a presence in other clouds, especially regionally. Like, this region might be in a different cloud, this region might be Microsoft, etc. And they want some proximity. They want to be able to host these workloads closer to, some of their important business systems. Could be ERPs, could be manufacturing settings, etc. So it's really a goal to sort of help support that. And I would say kind of the real sweet spot is, we have customers where they've deployed to Azure already, and they've got specific workloads. It could be for, once again, use case specific. Sometimes it's confidential computing, sometimes it's sensitive workloads, sometimes it's proximity. The whole sort of, hey, this is where my factory is, and I need to be able to like make sure like this can absorb, more sort of impacts from, say, a network connectivity perspective,
Mm.
and I want to be able to do that. So where we're at right now is we're in the middle of this, or maybe more the tail end of this early access preview. We do have customers that are onboarded, that are actually using the offering, kind of doing POCs, giving us feedback,
Mm.
and discovering a few bugs along the way, and so we're fixing those.
Mm.
And this fall, I would expect that we do have a public preview.
Mm.
Um, hoping I have a good announcement there at the event in Sweden in mid-October. But I think that's probably quite plausible that that's the case.
Mm.
And then this will be public preview. We will have the billing model published at that point in time, and this is real. I know sometimes there was the previous offering, which was in public preview for a long time and never reached GA, and quite confident this will reach GA. And we've got a lot of interest in this, and yeah, just looking forward to getting to public preview. And we don't have a GA date just yet. That'll be largely driven by customer feedback, but it is something that we will GA kind of as soon as we can, based upon readiness. As long as it's performing well, it's reliable, customers are happy with the feature set, then we'd look to expedite getting that to GA.
Yeah, I mean we have in Sweden, but I guess it's a lot of countries where they have a BizTalk server because they need to be local and be on their own servers. But I mean, it feels like now it's getting a real movement of this is the answer for them to actually stay at Microsoft and being able to use the power of Azure. But yeah, is that also your opinion of that?
I think that's the sweet spot. I think for like I talked about sort of those three different sort of use cases or buckets.
Mm.
I think the sweet spot is for customers that might already be in Azure,
Mm.
might already deploy workloads in Azure, but then just need this local presence for specific workloads, and that's where being able to use the same tool set, being able to use like the Azure portal for like your monitoring, your troubleshooting, seeing that rich run history, being able to resubmit from there. I think that's really the sweet spot where it's kind of like, I don't have to think about like the differences. I just kind of have to think about like where I want those workloads to be deployed.
Yeah.
And then I can manage it like this build the exact same way. So I think it really comes down to like, hey, what does the customer need, and how can we best sort of address those needs from that perspective.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, from a Swedish perspective, I think that I know that we are looking forward to this and
Yeah.
seeing what will
Yeah,
where will it end up.
the whole north, I think, because it's like if so, it's one of the biggest thing here, the healthcare developing teams from those different regions in Sweden want to learn more about the new technology. And what after BizTalk, it helped us a lot to have the announcement that BizTalk is not going to be living for much longer.
You also mentioned in your first session at Integrate, you talked about the business process tracking. Can you talk a bit more about that and what that is?
Sure. So business process tracking, we'll do a little bit of throwback to BizTalk. So for people that are familiar with BizTalk, there was that feature called BAM, Business Activity Monitoring. You can kind of think of this in a similar light. So the idea is that you've got key business data that you want to be able to extract, and you want to then be able to build sort of experiences on that data itself. And so obviously when we talk about BizTalk and even logic apps, right? There's a tremendous amount of like verbose technical information. You go into run history, you look at inputs, outputs, and you can kind of see a lot of data, which is great. Like it really helps you in troubleshooting. But if you're trying to sort of like focus on what's really important, how do you then go ahead and sort of make that data available? And so I think what ends up happening is that a lot of people have to then build custom solutions, or they have to like instrument their solution to capture that key data itself. So they're making changes in their actual workflow to emit these logs to somewhere. Maybe they're using like the track properties feature. Maybe they're using a custom solution, a custom connector, or maybe they're just logging to a database. And what we wanted to do was to whole simplify that whole sort of mechanism. We wanted to make sure that what we did sat on top of the workflow itself. We didn't want to inject things into the workflow. Number one, like there's a lot of logic apps that have been deployed. We don't want people to have to go back and retrofit and do a bunch of work for each workflow to take advantage of this. The other thing that was really important to us was reliable delivery and guaranteed delivery as well. So if you think about solutions like application insights or even log analytics, they are good solutions. But in my opinion, I don't really feel like they are the best. I don't think they were built with integration in mind. And that's just my personal opinion. And what I mean by that is, I think their sweet spot is if you think about, resources, like resource utilization, or even like say a web app. A web app, you're able to capture, hey, I got a request. I've got X many requests over the past hour, over the last minute. And then what is sort of my performance characteristics over that load? But rarely do you see anything about the payload of what those web apps are doing, right? But with integration, that's all we care about is we care about payloads. We care, like, if you lose a message, that's a big deal. Like, that could be a purchase order, that could be a lab requisition, that could be turning someone's power off or on, that could be billing. Like, it's hugely critical. And so, sometimes we do get asked, well, hey, why didn't you use App Insights, or why didn't you use Log Analytics? And the reality is that those solutions do rate sampling. So just go into your favorite web browser, type in application insights, type in rate sampling, and you might be a little bit surprised to see what you find. The reality is some of those solutions can drop requests because of throughput. And it's one of those things that's not going to drop the transaction, but it will basically drop the trace event or like the log event. And so then you get into situations where, hey, I'm looking for a tracked property, but I don't find it. Why? And the reality is, under significant load, those things can be dropped. And what they will do, because they're more interested in the performance characteristics, like what is my top end percentile of how long a request took, they will do aggregation on those requests. So they can give you the statistic, but they can't give you the actual event itself. And that's by design. Those solutions were built for performance. They weren't built for verbosity. They weren't built for the individual transaction. And that, I think, is one of the benefits of business process tracking, and part of the reason why we used ADX, Azure Data Explorer. And so sometimes people say, well, why did you use that? There were cheaper alternatives. But for us, we weren't interested in the potential of messages being dropped. And so what we've got is reliable ingestion on the ADX front. And we actually take advantage of our existing tracking jobs that take place in the actual runtime itself to push those events to ADX. And sort of why I'm talking about ADX, I think that's part of the value prop. But at the end of the day, the real value is how do you then expose this data to your business stakeholders? And stakeholders can mean many things. It could be inside of IT. You might have business analysts. You might have the integration team, or you could have people directly in the business unit that you're supporting. And you want to be able to expose this. And so what we've done is we've created an experience in the Azure portal that allows you to define a conceptual business process based upon different stages. Like, stage one is like order received. Stage two is let's check inventory. Okay, was it in inventory? Yes, great. Was it in inventory? No. Okay, let's go down a different path. In the case that it was in inventory, let's start to like fulfill that order. Let's start to ship that order. And so now you can model a conceptual business process. And for each of those stages, we can go ahead and say, hey, what are the data that we want to actually capture at that particular stage? And then what we'll do is we'll create this overlay that will basically give you this like red light, green light show that'll say, hey, I went down this particular path from a business process perspective and everything is healthy. Or I went down this other path and there's an exception or a failure. Now, the failure could be for technical reasons, or it could be for business reasons, like, hey, we're out of stock for this particular item. We should probably like let someone know about that. And then we can start to flag it from that perspective. And the other thing I would say is about our platform, and this is, once again, I'd say deliberate, is with ADX, it's a customer's data repository. It's basically bring your own ADX instance. And so that creates many opportunities. Number one, some people will say, well, hey, like your experience is in the Azure portal. We don't allow business users to the Azure portal. That's fair. So what's a tool that, business users typically like to use? Oh, Power BI. So it's your data. We're not trying to lock it up. We're not trying to monetize it. Here, create a Power BI dashboard, and then go ahead and build an experience on top of that. And so that's something that I've got kind of on the side. I've got it started. I haven't published it yet, but some sample templates to get people started that would allow you to go ahead and to use these things and then be able to, share that with their business users and allow the business user to then go use that. The data comes to the business user instead of the business user going to the data. So that's another piece that we are focused on. And I would say just one other thing about this is I don't think as an integration community,
Mm.
we spend enough time talking about business value.
Mm.
I think, what I did learn during my few years there on the RPA side is that segment of integration is very focused on business value.
Mm.
And I feel like this business process tracking is kind of like dipping our toe into like that area where it's like, hey, let's focus on the business value
Mm.
of these transactions as well. And so I think that's something that someone could also sort of build on top of to be able to say, hey, like, what is the actual value? Like, when this process runs,
Mm.
what is the value of that? And now you've got all the data. You can start to do some pretty simple math that says, like, hey, like, what are the benefits that we're now getting
Mm.
from using integration, as opposed to us being very focused on sort of back office nuts and bolts, NuGet package this, schema version that. The
Mm.
business doesn't care. So like I also want, I'd love to see us as a community sort of up level and really start focus on business value as opposed to just like, hey, we're in the back room connecting all of these protocols together, and start focusing more on outcomes.
I think that what you're in here, I mean, what you're talking about here about business value and how we as integrators can lift our understanding of what the business value is, also something we can spend another hour on this discussion because it's always seems like, not always, but you understand what I mean, that very often it seems like the integration platform is some black hole where the business doesn't go. If it does work, don't touch it. And if something happens, then it must be the integration parts
Yeah.
always.
And as you mentioned,
Mm.
we are also like we don't work with performance. We work with data.
Mm.
And Microsoft did not build this slogan. I will be stealing that for my next talk if okay, because it's not built for that. We are working with data, and that's what we should focus on. And if we're gonna be riding the next wave, uh, try to use our co-pilots and assistants, and then we'll have to focus on the data.
Mm.
And that take us to your next session in integrate.
Yeah, accelerating generative
Yes,
AI development with Azure Logic Apps, and I think
yes,
it's a
it blew my mind. How couldn't I think of this way
Mm.
before I listened to your last session there? Because yes, of course, this is possible. What is the coolest features that you have been doing lately that you think that other developers, if you were a developer in last 10 years, you would be like, whoa.
So I think like just to just touch on the generative AI stuff first, like the
Mm.
yeah, yeah. So actually, yeah, okay, though I can connect the dots here. So just to give some people some context about the session itself. So the idea was that we've got some building blocks that are available inside of Logic Apps. More specifically, we've got these Azure OpenAI connectors
Mm.
that allow you to implement the RAG pattern that I talked about before. So it's this idea that I can go ahead and ingest data, into my large language model, and then I have the ability to go ahead and reason over, search, retrieve, etc.
Mm.
on top of it. And what I was really focused on in the solution was this idea that we already are in the middle. Like we're in the middleware, we're an iPaaS, so we have access to a lot of valuable data. Like not me as Microsoft, but like us as integrators. So
Mm.
every organization that's using Logic Apps and integrated technologies actually has already got a head start. You can kind of there's sometimes these sayings like there is no AI without APIs,
Mm.
and it's kind of true in the sense that you need to get the data in order to be able to ingest it and then to be able to go ahead and reason over top of it.
Mm.
And so my session was really about like I had an existing demo, and I deliberately chose this demo to then sort of use for my generative AI session. And what I really did was I sort of used this notion of pub sub, where I wanted to go ahead and subscribe to a key business event in my particular integration scenario, and I'm then going to go and subscribe to that event and then ingest that data into my LLM.
Mm.
And so that's what I did. It was basically it was kind of a customer service power outage scenario. And when the work order was complete, I wanted to go grab that message or subscribe to that message and then be able to go ahead and ingest it.
Mm.
And the idea was that that work order completion included a lot of valuable information. I had customer information, I had the technician, the power line technician information, I had the work order information, like how long it took, what were the materials that were involved, and then I also had safety information. And for a utility, safety is hugely important, right?
Mm.
So I had a lot of very valuable information. It's kind of like, well, hey, what can I do with this now? So the idea was like, why don't I go ahead and ingest this? And then I had an experience where I would basically then go and search across this data to try to get some insights.
Mm.
And so that's where I could start to talk to my data and say, like, hey, like, where are we seeing all of these, the most frequent outages? Hey, what are the safety incidents where it involves, say, someone slipping? And, how many tickets has like this particular person had, things of that nature. And so what was kind of interesting about that was that I didn't do any additional training, and I didn't, it was kind of like an ad hoc query.
Mm.
So it kind of reminded me a little bit of like, a search engine where it's like, today you go into a search engine and you can basically sort of free form, make an utterance or a query, and it's going to give you a bunch of results. And it reminded me a little bit of this. It's just kind of like, this is so powerful. Like,
Mm.
companies have never really had this opportunity to do this in a reasonable way. And I was able to do this literally kind of in an hour.
Mm.
It was a matter of like, we've got a template well, we've got templates now. In our template gallery, we've got a bunch of AI templates,
Mm.
but at the time there was a GitHub repo sample.
Mm.
And basically it was something one of our PMs Parth put together. And I basically, downloaded it and basically deployed it and got it working. And I had something working kind of in an hour. And I thought that was pretty cool.
Mm.
Now, Ahmed, to answer your second part of your question, Divya on the team showed me a demo last week, which I thought was pretty cool. So this goes back probably 4 or 5 years when I was on the Power Automate team. And I don't know if you folks ever watched that HBO show called Silicon Valley.
Yes, of course. I love it.
Yes. Yeah, it's an amazing show. So I'm sure you remember like the hot dog, not hot dog episode with Jin Yang. Yeah. This was like, like at least 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago. And it was like at the time, Jin Yang, who's a character on the show, built this like AI app that would, you could take your phone out and take a picture of food and it would tell you if it was a hot dog or
Or
not hot dog, right? And so it was kind of a bit of a joke, but it was also pretty cool because at the time, to do something like that was very difficult. And so I remember doing a demo when I was on the Power Automate team with a buddy, John Levesque, and we did this. It was actually a really fun YouTube video. We did this hot dog, not hot dog thing where we had the Flow app, and there was a button where you could go ahead and take a picture of food, and we'd call Flow, and we would call Cognitive Services, and it would tell me if this is a hot dog or not. And so we went around the Microsoft cafeterias in Redmond and did this, and it was a lot of fun. Now, at the time, it was still pretty cool technology, but it was this idea that we had to train the model. So we had to go around and take pictures of like what actually a hot dog was, and then we have to go around and take pictures of like what a hot dog wasn't. Now, the other day, Divya showed me a demo, and this was using the Azure OpenAI. I think this was 4.0. I think it was the 4.0 model.
Mm.
And this was one of those things where you can now. And she had basically 3 actions. She had the HTTP request.
Mm.
She had the Azure OpenAI chat completions action, and then she had a response. And it was one of those things where she was going ahead and kind of doing exactly what we had done before, but she was doing it in 3 actions, and she was doing no training. So she was using pictures of different like landscapes or flowers or whatever, and basically asking questions about this.
Mm.
And this is this idea of a general, LLM
Mm.
that sort of is available to everyone. And so it's it reminded me of that time like 5-6 years ago where there was another use case in the Power Platform. Actually, a local company at the time had built this. They were a pipeline company, and they were very concerned about vegetation.
Mm.
And so what they would have is like these their sort of field technicians would have to be very careful about the vegetation growing in around their pipeline. And sometimes you'd have things like poison ivy and other poisonous plants.
Mm.
And so they had responsibilities to like remove that. And obviously their people had to be careful. And so what they used to do is have a binder full of images. And they'd have to like hand out tens or if not hundreds of these binders to their field technicians that were maintaining their pipeline and go out and have to like flip through pages to go see this.
Mm.
They built a power app kind of based on the same idea with that would say like, hey, this plant is like poisonous or not. But once again, they had to do all of that training. Whereas like nowadays, like this is sort of embedded into these general models itself. And so there's so many applications for this
Mm.
when you think about like manufacturing, health and safety. We saw one at Integrate. Mick Badron did one about healthcare.
Yeah.
Like, and so pretty phenomenal in terms of like, hey, this is just general knowledge now.
Yeah.
This is not something that you have to specifically train. And obviously, there's avenues to go do more specific training for your own data sets if you want.
Mm.
But this idea of like, how simple this has now become and how intelligent these things have
Mm.
become is pretty impressive.
Yeah. And I was thinking while watching your second session here, I mean you talked about it more or less now, but you also mentioned it that the business case is right under our noses, and I think that that was very interesting. I mean, an interesting statement, and regarding to what we talk about now, and I think that, I mean, how do we as integrators and technicians talk about this, and how should we talk about this so so people can actually get this in their businesses, and to understand that this is common knowledge now, this is available for everyone.
Well, and I think it comes to I think 2 points. Like number one, and I something this is something I've always tried to do, and something I've always taken pride in is that when I'm building, interfaces, especially earlier in my career, I was always trying to understand what is the purpose of this.
Mm.
So it's not this like, hey, throw these specs over the wall, and like this is your source schema, this is your destination schema, and these are your mapping rules, right? Like you need to ask those questions if you're not part of those meetings, if you're not understanding what is the business case. Like that is like I think number one is really try to understand the domain itself. And then I think the next thing is you know POCs. I really think once you understand kind of that business context,
Mm.
then I think it's more of like even it's like a conversation with the business stakeholder because
Mm.
like they're probably not going to be ready for this yet or maybe thinking about this yet, but it'd be a matter of like, so what are like if we build this interface or these
Mm.
series of interfaces, like what would be some questions you would want to know, what
Yeah.
would you want to get out of this data?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that gets flushed out when you have these reporting projects, but I think that's kind of one area
Yeah.
that you could start to say. And I think the beauty of these things is the POCs, they really are short. Like I said, we've given you the samples. They're now in our template gallery.
Mm.
Like you can really like create like a topic in
Mm.
Service Bus, subscribe to this information, have a workflow, do this ingestion, and then even just use Postman to sort of query this data
Mm.
as a starting point. So I think that's kind of like level one.
Yeah.
I think level two is is where we get into more of this autonomous agent situations, and I think this becomes pretty interesting too. And I feel like this is I'm not sure if everyone is ready for this yet, but I would also encourage people to start thinking this way
Mm.
is like so even today a lot of the use cases are about chat with my data.
Mm.
So hey, I'm going to do the rag pattern, I'm going to ingest this data, I'm then going to be able to expose it and give people the ability to ask questions. And I think that gives you some value, like right off the bat. I think there's some level of value that you can achieve from that. I think the next level of value is kind of like, well, all I'm doing when I'm chatting with data is assigning more homework.
Yeah.
And I saw this with like when I was in Power Virtual Agents early on, whereas like you would see customers, they would see some of these capabilities, natural language understanding. Hey, I can ask these questions. Hey, I've got this list of frequently asked questions. Let's go ahead and ingest it into here. I can start talking with my data. And what we would find is that that was a great sort of initial use case to get people interested in chatbots,
Yeah.
but it didn't keep people there. It was kind of like as soon as that data becomes stale, that information becomes stale, then it was like gone.
Yeah.
And so people weren't as interested in it. And once again, you're not getting the value. So we would always encourage customers to think about how do I transact on this data? So think about customer support. Maybe I'm talking to a retail site
Hmm.
and I can say, like, what are your hours? Oh, our hours are 9 to 5. Great. I could have looked that up on the webpage. It's like, what's your shipping policy or return policy?
Hmm.
Okay, great. Once again, I could have done that on the website.
Yeah.
But then it's like, now what if it's a matter of like, hey, I want to return this item. And it's like, great. How can I help you with that? And it basically starts to do that for you,
Yeah.
where it's like in the system, it registers you want to return this. And then it's like, oh, I'm going to send you a shipping label, right? Like now you're starting to actually automate that last mile of work.
Hmm.
And so I think that's kind of the next step. And I think you're certainly hearing Microsoft start to talk about this. And I think when we've got our big conference season coming up, you're going to hear more and more about this.
Yeah.
Is this idea of like, instead of me giving you a list of like 5 things you need to do,
Hmm.
why don't me as like the agent, the sort of the AI, do those for you?
Yeah.
And so I think this is kind of a similar situation where we think about integration. So I might be able to say log a request inside, like I say, a help desk ticket for you. But what if I now start to try to solve that problem for you?
Hmm.
And so I think integration, we're particularly well positioned to do this as well, in part due to our triggers.
Yeah.
So let's take an example of say ServiceNow. Someone's on a chatbot, they log a ticket, it's now inside of ServiceNow. So what's kind of the paths that we can go down? Oh, okay, we're going to have a person come along, look at that ticket. Maybe ServiceNow does some sort of knowledge-based correlation. It says, okay, here's some steps you can try, and then you get this person reaching out to the other person to do these types of things. And so now, what if it's like you've got an integration that's waking up
Hmm.
and it's going through and saying, hey, because I've now ingested these cases in the past, I have a pretty good idea of what needs to be done from this perspective.
Hmm.
Now, maybe there's things that's permissions. Maybe
Yeah.
you can now start to automate giving those permissions.
Yeah.
Maybe it's kind of like, I don't know, like there's a certificate or there's a system down, but like you can now start to like automate those specific tasks.
Yeah.
And for people that are concerned about, hey, these runaway processes, hey, the machines are going to take over,
Mm.
there's this concept of human in the loop. You could use the Teams connector
Hmm.
as part of this, where you give the human the override button. So you can have the generative AI say, hey, like these are the steps that I want to go perform.
Hmm.
Send it to the human. The human can take a look at it and say, approve, go for it, or reject,
Yeah.
and then stop it. And then the human can sort of pick that up.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of the next evolution of this is like, how do we start to like leverage all of this data, these knowledge bases that we do have? And then how do we actually, remove the human work altogether? Now, and I'm not talking like remove every human thing. That's not suggesting that. I'm like, obviously, like if you want to really extract value, you have to remove the work.
Yeah.
And so I think there's obviously this, spectrum, this continuum of like things that you can go after and
Hmm.
things you can't go after. And so it's one of those things where it's a maturity curve, and start simple,
Hmm.
have human in the loop, have oversight, have the off button, and basically go forward and still find value from that perspective.
Yeah.
And that's what's happened with the technology. Actually, I agree with you 100%. When people are afraid of that it's going to take over, that's what's happening over the time.
Hmm.
In our community, as example, people once upon the time, people was thinking that Pesto going to live forever. It's become an irrelevant point to talk about. It's just, it has to be gone now.
Hmm.
And it's
So,
so, yeah.
oh, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah,
I was gonna.
continue, please.
There's a person named Gary Vaynerchuk. He's kind of he owns a bunch of businesses. He's a bit of an online marketer, but he's a very solid business person. And he has this saying, and it goes, "Technology is undefeated."
Hmm.
And so if you think about all of these historical paradigm shifts, technology is never lost.
Mm.
I always like to look at like the stories of elevator attendants,
Mm.
where when you used to get into an elevator, you used to have an elevator attendant
Yeah.
Yes.
that would basically press the buttons. And I know it was more than just pressing the buttons. There was like they'd open the cage, and elevators weren't as reliable. But like we don't think about that anymore. And so we've seen this evolution shift, and it's one of those things where there's no point fighting it, because technology will always win. And
Yeah.
so obviously I'm always conscious. I've got kids. I kind of think about like, hey, what's the future for them?
Yeah.
But I always feel like putting your head in the sand and ignoring it is like the worst thing that you can do.
Yeah.
I think there's obviously understanding it, finding out how you can leverage it, how you can be part of it,
Yeah.
is I think how people should be thinking about this, because the alternative is far worse. For the people that refuse to sort of get involved or understand it, you're only going to put yourself at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
And you don't know what the next sort of wave is going to bring. At one point, I think there was like people striking in New York City about these elevator attendants being out of work,
Mm.
but it created opportunities for them to like focus on other things. And we don't think about, hey, where's the elevator attendants
Mm.
anymore? And you could probably look at that at like the telephone operators in the
Mm.
same manner as well. So it's one of those things where I do feel people should be thinking about this. They should try to understand the technology, understand the opportunities,
Yeah.
and then be able to sort of like find out where they can sort of fit in.
We can also combine the discussions regarding business value and business. I mean, for us to understand, and also for people to understand AI, is that if we bring value to this, and then people's gonna understand it, and then it's gonna feel like, oh, thank God we don't do that anymore. We can focus on something else
Yeah.
that's more value for the society, or for the business. So
And
yeah.
as an integrator now, don't need to explain my work. Now I finally have something that can actually reflect what I do in the background.
Yeah.
It adds even more value to what we do because
Absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah, no, integration, like it's a great time to be involved in
Mm.
integration. Like it really is. You can't do this stuff without integration. Like if you say I'm going to build an AI app, that AI app does nothing without data. And so
Yeah.
if you
yeah,
think about like how do you feed the data? Well, generally that's integration, especially if you've got many different sources that you're going to pull from.
Mm. Yeah.
That's all integration. So that's where it's kind of dawned on me earlier this spring, like how big of an opportunity this is for integrators. And I think that's everyone should be looking at it like from that angle.
Yeah. Definitely. So, I mean, we could talk even for more and more hours, but I guess that, I mean, we are going to
mhm.
see you at Nordic Integration Summit, right?
Yep, looking
Yeah,
forward to being in Sweden. I've been there a few times. It's been a
yeah,
little while, but always enjoy heading over to Sweden. So
yeah.
looking forward to it.
Is there something that you can tell us now to actually get it even more hyped than it is? I mean, something's going to be
Well,
announced.
I don't know if there's anything crazy that's going to be announced. I think what you'll kind of see is sort of the evolution, or sort of the like the progress from integrate, if
Yeah,
anything. I am looking forward to the AI session. I plan to sort of build on top. I'll have a different use case, but this idea of like what I talked about, integrate, I'll try to take to the next level and
yeah,
incorporate many of the things that we've talked about here from this perspective. I
yeah,
think obviously the hybrid stuff is something that we'll hear more about as well. And we have released some pretty interesting things lately since Integrate. I think the template
mm,
gallery is there. Like some of the scripting stuff that we talked about at Integrate, that's now shipped, both the C Sharp and the PowerShell. Those are actually doing quite well.
mm,
So I think that's going to be interesting for people as well. And perhaps I'll probably have something to show just around the data mapper user experience refresh
yeah.
as well. I think that's something, fingers crossed. There's probably something I can show there as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I look for some of those things, and we'll see what else
We,
comes up in the next month
yeah,
or so.
yeah, we're really looking forward to it, and I mean, we're gonna come there as a team, and a lot of people will be there and be excited to see what will be announced and what we will talk about. Of course, the community
Yeah,
is yeah, it's
it,
what we
it's
look for.
it's actually really fun to. I am a part of the organizers
Mm,
team, so it has been fun to actually be a part of this organizing, getting this uh, like summit together,
yeah,
because we didn't think that it will be having this much attention from the community, but apparently everyone here in Sweden and in the north was looking forward for something like that, and
the community is strong.
yes, the community is strong,
Yeah,
so it
Well,
but
was.
mm,
I will say this, that integration in Europe is very strong,
mm,
and Sweden is at the top of that list as well. I remember going to present at a BizTalk user group about like SCOM, System Center Operations Manager. And I think there was like 100 people that were there. That was a long, long time ago. So it's a really energized, enthusiastic community. So
yeah,
definitely, when the opportunity came up to go speak over there,
yeah,
I certainly, didn't say no. It was
yeah,
something I wanted to be a part of as well.
yeah.
So.
So one of the last, I mean, questions that, but you almost mentioned it in the beginning. So this section is called the integration love story. So what we mean about that is, when did you do you have any specific case where you actually like fell in love with integration? Do you have any specific business case or any technique that you felt like, wow, integration?
Uh, so so this one, I think there's many, and to be honest, this one wasn't mine per se, but it was like the team I was on. I didn't implement this, but someone on the team implemented this. So it was actually turning someone's power on and off,
Mm,
using integration. And so this was at a utility, and it was one of those things where this utility had covered a lot of rural properties,
mm,
and some of these properties had like were sort of seasonal, like sort of like at the lake, the
mm,
cabins, those types of things. And it was one of those things where people could request a disconnect
mm,
because like it was the end of the season, it was going to get cold. And so what this would mean is that you would oftentimes have to send a power line technician, you know 30-40 kilometers,
mm,
20ish miles to go turn the power off, which for them was like kind of like a 2-minute job.
mm,
But they would end up spending probably an hour to get there and back to go
mm.
do this. And they were also just like wasting gas. Well, I guess using gas.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it was one of those things where we had introduced this notion of automated meter
Mm,
infrastructure, AMI, and this is like 18 years ago or 16
mm,
years ago, so this is like a long time ago,
mm,
but it still resonates with me. And it was this ability from SAP that when someone requested their power to be turned off, and if they had the right type of meter,
mm,
they literally could hit a button in SAP, and basically BizTalk was subscribing or listening to that particular event and would then sort of orchestrate these calls against the automated metering system,
yeah,
and basically would send the request down the power lines.
yeah.
So power line carrier, like, and I'm sure the technology's changed. They've got RF and all this crazy stuff now, but those requests would actually make it down the power line to the meter, and then the meter would basically get turned off. And so it was like highly impactful for many reasons. I think there was environmental benefits because we weren't rolling a truck. It was a productivity benefit because that allowed a power line technician to go to a job that required them to be there.
Mm,
And I think it also reduced its safety, the risk of safety incidents, right? Like anytime you go to a property, there's some inherent risks. I
mm,
think anytime you're on the highway, especially if it's like on the shoulder seasons, questionable weather,
yeah,
that imposes some questionable risks as well.
mm,
And so that one still just really sticks out to me as being like hugely transformational,
yeah,
from that perspective.
mm.
And that was something that's sort of still near and dear to my heart, even though I didn't implement it. A colleague had implemented it,
Mm,
and that's something that I still look back on as being like, wow, that's that's amazing
Yeah,
to be able to go ahead and do it. And that's another example of like, you know, SAP was built without that sort of in mind.
yeah, yeah,
This AMI system, like obviously was built with this in mind, but they didn't know like the other end of the pipe who
yeah,
was going to be able to do that. And you know, the ability to go do that. And you know, there was huge business value there. And
yeah,
so it wasn't just about doing integration for the sake of integration, but it was hardcore business value. So if you did, what was the ROI of that interface?
mm,
It paid for itself probably thousands of times
yeah,
over
yeah,
as a result. And so I just, you know, I've always worked for these companies where we've had like strong business leadership that bought into this notion
mm,
of of integration, and it was, I think, for these types of reasons
mm,
that you could do it. And you know, sometimes integration is a bad word because it's perceived as being complex and
mm,
expensive, and sometimes it can be. I think the whole you know, our goal with like Logic Apps and Azure Integration Services is to reduce the complexity and the cost.
mm,
But when you can really find those sweet spots that are transformational,
mm,
it's pretty impactful. And you know, at that point, you start to get a little bit more recognition
yeah.
from from like everyone in the company when you can start to go after some of those particular use cases.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Wow, that's
Yeah, it's a really good story because nowadays you don't really get that impressed that easy
no.
with things. Like back then, I can imagine that
How
would.
impressive was that to see
Yes,
it,
of course.
power went out.
We take these things for granted.
Yeah.
This is that's a really nice story.
And the so we actually the my colleague Luciano, he was the guy that built this. Like there was a BizTalk summit, I think, in Redmond,
Mm.
probably like 2013 ish, somewhere around there. And so he actually went there and presented and brought a light bulb onto stage, and they did some you know, finagling to get this registered, and he actually demoed this live in Redmond on
Wow.
stage.
Wow.
And he was in SAP and like hit the button, and you know, I don't know, I can't remember how that all got plumbed and working, but he actually did this online in front of everyone. And so it was yeah, it was truly you know, great to see the demo, but
Yeah,
like we
yeah,
would,
yeah,
would
yeah.
see it, we would see it live, you know, from that perspective, you know, back at the actual office. So
Yeah, wow, it's that's a great story, and I mean, that
Mm,
impactful.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
also as a presenter, but yeah,
and we really grateful for your time today.
yeah.
And we are now like hitting one last question because you're gonna have to
sure.
ask a question, and that's gonna be our last question. Next guest will be expecting a question from you.
Do I know who the guest is, or
Yeah, the next guest is gonna be Mike Stevenson.
oh, Mike Stevenson? Okay.
Mm.
Yeah.
Um, so that's a great guest. Number one, it's one of those things where Michael Stevenson is just kind of one of the top integrators in the world.
Mm.
So I think so. Maybe this, if we could do two questions,
Mm.
because I know Mike's big into golf.
Yeah.
So I would say let's ask Mike, what is his favorite shot to hit on the golf course? Like, is it, you know, off the tee? Is it you know, 80 yards away with a 54 wedge or 58 wedge? Let's
Yeah.
ask him that.
Mhm.
Um, and then I would also ask Mike. So he's, you know, he's worked with a lot of different customers,
Yeah.
uh, and he's done some phenomenal work. And maybe I would ask him almost more of like the anti-pattern question of like, you know, how do customers get integration wrong?
Yeah.
And not so much from like a nuts and bolts perspective, but I would say like positioning.
Mm.
Like what could customers do, what could integration teams do to better position the value of integration? Let's go with that one.
Yeah.
That's a nice question.
Two great questions, and we like business value, so we'll definitely pass that on to Mike.
Yes, I would like myself to answer this question, but yeah, like yeah, let's leave it to Mike. But yeah,
All
uh,
right.
it's gonna be interesting to hear his answer. All right, and thank you again. We really appreciate this time that you spent with us, and it was a really great conversation.
Yeah.
And hopefully, like soon, we will be hearing something new from you, and we're gonna have the opportunity to get in touch again and record another session where
Yeah.
we talk about the next level of AI, maybe, because that's some I think it's gonna be good. And also, we would like to have a little bit of a deep dive on the hybrid session,
Yeah.
because I know that you like Sweden, and Sweden would want to hear more about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
sounds great. No, thanks for having me. This has been
Yeah.
fun.
Thanks so much,
Thank
Kent.
you.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks.
you. Bye.